Captain Cobban broadcasts an emergency call over the radio.
Mayday! Gate is rose. We're rolling over.
Scandies Rose was a 40-meter steel fishing vessel registered in Dutch Harbor, Alaska. Built in 1978 by Bender Shipbuilding Company of Mobile, Alabama, the vessel was licensed to fish the Bering Sea for king crab, opilio or Alaskan snow crab, and Pacific cod using rigid steel mesh cages known as pots. In the summer months, it would act as a support vessel for the salmon fisheries in the Bering Sea and Gulf of Alaska. It was owned by the Scandies Rose Fishing Company based in Bremerton, Washington State, and bought from its previous owner in 2008. Company ownership was divided between three people: Dan Matson acting as the vessel's manager and holding the majority ownership. Scandies Rose was valued at $15 million. It was equipped with 12 survival suits, one EPIRB or emergency position indicating radio beacon, and 2 life rafts. This EPIRB is designed to float free if the vessel sinks, automatically activating, and the signal can be picked up by satellites anywhere in the world. An EPIRB sends out a distress signal with a unique identification code that gives information about the vessel, its location, its name, type of survival gear, and emergency points of contact ashore. On the 20th of June 2019, Scandies Rose got their condition and valuation survey report, which shows that the vessel was well maintained and underwent a detailed inspection from April to June 2019. The condition and valuation survey didn't include a new vessel stability report. A stability report is used to generate a set of instructions about how to maintain the vessel's stability, how much weight can be distributed without affecting the vessel's stability. Scandies Rose continues to use the previous stability report. I don't know when that report was last updated. On the 29th of December 2019, Captain Gary Cobban Jr. and his 6 crew members prepare Scandies Rose for departure from Cannery Row in Kodiak. The Bering Sea pot cod fishing season starts on the 1st of January 2020. Bering Sea in winter is a very cold 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Scandies Rose has a crew of 7, the captain and 6 deckhands. Captain Gary Cobban Jr. owns 30% of the vessel and as captain makes the decisions on when and where to fish. He has 45 years of fishing experience, 40 of those as captain of fishing vessels in the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea. In 2009, he became the full-time skipper of Scandies Rose and is regarded by his peers as a very good fisherman and experienced captain. The deckhand's experience ranges from as little as 1 year working on similar vessels to as much as 20 years. A deckhand prepares and operates the fishing gear, mends and repairs pots, and when needed helps the captain navigate and sail the vessel. One deckhand, David Cobban, is the captain's son. Art Ganesius is the vessel's engineer. Brock Rainey, the deck boss. Seth Soren Ganner-Rousseau is the vessel's cook. John Lawler has 11 years of fishing experience and joins the vessel for his first stint 3 days before it departs. And Dean Gribble, with 20 years experience, joins the vessel at short notice when another deckhand quits. I think he's worked on Scandies Rose before, but he wasn't originally scheduled on this voyage. The crew work late into the night, loading and securing 198 crab pots. The pots vary in weight, and based on the stability instructions the crew have, each pot weighs 379 kilograms. Pots are stacked in 9 rows from front to back, and 4 rows from side to side, reaching a height of 6 meters above the deck, and taking up the entire main deck space of the vessel. Each row is stacked 5 high, except in front of the bridge's starboard or right side conning station, where they're only stacked 4 high so the captain can see past them. And they're secured to the vessel with chains. The conning station is a bit like a lookout where the captain can steer the vessel and see where he's going. The next day, on the 30th of December, they transfer to a fueling dock where they load 2,100 gallons of diesel fuel, top off the water tanks, buy 6,811 kilograms of bait, and load it in the forward storeroom. Captain Cobban conducts safety drills with the crew. They discuss the engine room's fire extinguishing system, the location of life rafts, how to use the vessel's EPIRB, and how to make a mayday call using the vessel's radios. David Cobham, the captain's son, makes a mock mayday call, and Dean Gribble demonstrates how to don an immersion suit, which he does in 42 seconds. Immersion or survival suits are waterproof suits designed to protect against hypothermia in cold water. Without them, the expected survival time for a person in the Bering Sea is between 30 and 90 minutes. But with a survival suit, that can be up to 5.5 hours, provided the suit doesn't leak. The suits are stored in a cabinet on the bridge. The crew are shown the EPIRB, but they don't test to make sure it's operating. The safety drill is recorded, signed by all the crew, and sent to the vessel manager. The captain discusses the weather forecast for their route to make sure everyone knows how bad the weather will be. He says they'll go into icing conditions where sea spray can freeze on the vessel and the crab pots. Before they depart, he checks the weather on both the National Weather Service for the marine forecast and windy.com, a weather forecasting website and app on mobile devices. Most captains of fishing vessels operating in the area use the windy.com app because they prefer the graphics and the finer scale details. 5 hours before their departure, the National Weather Service issues a marine forecast with gale force winds and heavy freezing spray warnings for the vessel's route. At 20:35 on the 30th of December, Scandies Rose departs Kodiak at an average speed of 10 knots. Its planned route is through Kuprinov Strait, then southwest across the Shilikhov Strait towards False Pass and on to the Bering Sea. After clearing the harbour, the captain creates a watch roster for the crew to be on navigation watch and steer the vessel. Captain Cobham will operate the vessel for 6 hours, and each crew member will stand duty for 1 hour, with the rotation repeating itself every 12 hours. From 0200 to 0800 on the 31st of December, the crew rotate through their hour-long bridge watch. At the end of each watch, the crew member completes a check of the engine room to ensure the vessel's engines and auxiliary equipment are in good working order. During the first hours of the voyage, the waves are coming from the port or left side, and the wind is coming from the starboard or right side. Inside the bridge, only 2 of the windows have heaters to prevent them from icing over. The watchkeeper on duty notes that the vessel has taken several waves over the bow, and ice is accumulating on the starboard side of the vessel and building up on the forward pots. He estimates the ice is about 1 inch thick on the mesh of the forward starboard pots and the exterior railings of the vessel, but isn't thick enough that they need to remove the ice. To remove the ice, they need to slow down, head into wind, and smash the ice with sledgehammers. Scandies Rose continues on a steady southwesterly course, with the engine at a constant RPM, but its speed decreases from 10 to 6.5 knots. The wind and weather is getting worse and throwing up a lot of spray that's turning into ice. At 19:30, before the captain begins his 2000 to 0200 watch, he talks with Dean Gribble, the crew member on watch. They discuss the declining weather, the accumulating ice on the vessel and crab pots, and the development of a 2-degree list to starboard. They consider reducing speed and altering course to limit the freezing spray, which is creating the icing. Dean asks if he should wake the crew and break the ice off the pots, but Cobham decides to maintain course and speed and not to wake the crew. He feels the weather is too rough to have the crew out on deck chopping ice in 70-knot winds, and that they can wait until the vessel is in protected waters. Scandies Rose is about 11 miles from locations that can give some shelter from the wind around Sutwick Island. Captain Cobham tells Art, the engineer, to transfer fuel to the port tanks to correct the starboard list. Before leaving the bridge, Dean notes through the clear bridge windows that the starboard pot stacks and webbing are coated with ice 2 inches thick, which is making Scandies Rose a bit heavier on the starboard side, which is why they have a 2-degree list. At 2012, Captain Cobham calls Captain Dan Matson, the majority shareholder of the Scandies Rose Fishing Company, and also the skipper of Amatuli, which departed ahead of them. Scandies Rose is about 8 miles northeast of Sutwick Island. Amatuli is 6 miles northeast of Ulukta Head, which is about 360 miles southwest of Scandies Rose position, and preparing to enter Dutch Harbour. The two captains discuss the weather and the current conditions of Scandies Rose without making any definite decisions. Cobbin calls a fellow captain aboard the commercial fishing vessel Pacific Sounder. He tells him the vessel is icing badly and is concerned that they now have a severe starboard list. The crew have loaded Scandies Rose according to the stability instructions on board, but these instructions aren't reliable. The guidelines at the time for calculating the effects of icing on a fishing vessel's stability don't take into account how ice actually accumulates on, in, and around the stacks of crab pots. Captain Cobbin says he doesn't feel safe for his crew to be breaking ice on the open deck because of the rough weather, so he'll try to reach shelter from the wind southwest of Sutwick Island. At 21:45, Scandies Rose is 2.5 miles south of Sutwick. Captain Cobbin reduces speed to 6 knots and turns Scandies Rose 50 degrees to starboard into a northwesterly course and heads for shelter off the southern bay of Sutwick. He calls Pacific Sounder's captain again and, in a panicked tone, tells him that the list has gotten worse. Below deck, John Lawler and Dean Gribble, the two deckhands, are jolted awake as they suddenly roll to the starboard side of their bunk beds. Scandies Rose violently heels more than 20 degrees to starboard and doesn't roll back to an upright position. Sensing something's wrong, John leaps out of bed and heads for the bridge, yelling out, "What's going on?" Captain Cobbin responds, I don't know, I think we're sinking." He's on the phone, frantically trying to make a mayday call, but no alarms are sounding on the bridge, so John yells down to his roommate Dean that the boat's sinking. Dean hurries to the bridge and pulls out the immersion suits from the cabinet. Within a few minutes, 3 more crew members assemble on the bridge, but not the engineer. With Scandies Rose listing heavily to starboard, they struggle to don their emergency suits. Once John gets his emergency suit halfway on, he exits the bridge through the portside door. Dean also struggles to don his immersion suit. The chair he uses to prop himself up gives way and he falls to the floor. He crawls through the portside door where John helps him get the suit on. At 21:55, Cobbin finally broadcasts a mayday call over the radio.
Mayday! Scandies Rose. We're rolling over.
Cobbin is able to transmit the vessel's location before the vessel lurches, sending him tumbling to the deck and sliding all the way to the bridge's starboard wall. At 21:55, the Coast Guard at Kodiak picks up the mayday call. When they respond, they don't get a reply from Scandies Rose. The Coast Guard immediately notify Coast Guard District 17 Command Center in Juneau of a vessel in distress, giving the vessel's name and location. District 17 relays the information to the Coast Guard sector in Anchorage. At 22:08, Anchorage Coast Guard Command Center orders Air Station Kodiak to launch an MH-60 Jayhawk rescue helicopter. After several attempts to radio Scandies Rose that go unanswered, the Coast Guard issues an urgent broadcast requesting all vessels in the area to maintain a sharp lookout and report all sightings to the Coast Guard. They also call the fishing vessel Rough and Ready, which is anchored approximately 25 miles west of the last known position of Scandies Rose. Because of the weather, Rough and Ready isn't able to assist. Outside the port bridge door, John and Dean scream at the others to get on deck quickly. Scandies Rose heels further to starboard until it reaches around 45 degrees and the power goes out. They can hear the other crew members crying for help as they try to climb out. John and Dean search for a line to throw to the crew trapped inside the bridge, but all the lines are frozen solid. David Connon, the captain's son, makes it to the portside door, dons his emergency suit, then stops to wait for his father, who's struggling to make his way to the exit. Then Scandies Rose keels over and starts to sink. John and Dean struggle to stay on the high side, but a wave sweeps them off the upturned vessel and into the icy water. Dean turns back to the vessel and sees the bow standing straight up out of the water. Then it disappears, taking the rest of the crew with it as it vanishes below the icy waterline. John and Dean become separated by the 9-meter waves and 45-knot winds. As Scandies Rose sinks, the life rafts mounted on the wheelhouse roof are automatically released from a depth of 4 meters. The life rafts are connected to the ship by a 30-meter line called a painter. As the painter stretches to its full length, it activates the life raft's compressed CO2 cylinders, automatically inflating them. The EPIRB releases at the same depth as the rafts. Dean sees the light of one of the life rafts about 15 meters away. Floating in his immersion suit, he rides a wave to the life raft and clambers aboard, then starts yelling for the others. John hears Dean, swims towards his voice, and 20 minutes after being separated, they're reunited. In the rough water, the life raft is flooded. Despite having over a meter of water in the life raft, it's floating, and the water actually keeps it stable in the rough seas. Dean and John are immersed in freezing water, but their suits retain their body heat, allowing them to tolerate the punishing cold conditions. After 10 minutes, the raft's light goes out. In the dark, they see the light of the second life raft. They're tempted to swim towards it, but they're already fighting to survive in the wet, cold, and heaving life raft. So, after assessing the situation, they decide not to take the risk. After some time, they locate the emergency survival pack tightly tied down near the door of the raft. With the bulky gloves of the immersion suit, they struggle to open the survival pack. Then they hear a helicopter circling in the sky above, so they rapidly fire flares from the survival pack in an attempt to catch its attention. After using up all the flares, they still can't actually see any rescue craft. It's just the wind playing tricks on them. At Air Station Kodiak, planning the rescue operation is complicated by the remote location and severe weather conditions, which delays the launch of the Jayhawk rescue helicopter. Additional flight planning is required, and the air crew loads extra fuel onto the helicopter to extend its range and search time. At 23:30, over 90 minutes after picking up the emergency call, the rescue helicopter finally takes off from Air Station Kodiak to begin the search and rescue operation. Several minutes later, District 17 Command Center diverts the Coast Guard cutter Mellon from its patrol near Dutch Harbor to the last known location of the Scandies Rose. Mellon's estimated time of arrival is over 16 hours later. A C-130 aircraft from Airbase Elmonton-Richardson in Anchorage is deployed to assist in the search and act as a communications relay platform. Because of the extreme weather conditions, the Coast Guard helicopter pilots have to fly below cloud cover at a 91-meter ceiling with less than half a mile visibility. Winds gusting around the islands cause severe turbulence and downdrafts, which are so severe that both pilots struggle to keep their helicopter level. At 0200, after a 2.5-hour flight to complete the 170-mile journey, the MH-60 Jayhawk helicopter arrives at the Mayday coordinates. The waves are 6 to 9 meters in height, with winds of 35 to 50 knots and heavy rain and snow. Scandies Rose's EPIRB has an operating life of 48 hours, but the Coast Guard haven't picked up its signal. Without any signal to home in on, the rescue helicopter begins a search pattern looking for the vessel, any survivors, or a debris field. They locate a life raft and send a rescue swimmer down to investigate, only to find it's empty. 4 hours after boarding their life raft, John and Dean hear the sound of an engine and see what they believe is a vessel's mast light. With no flares left to fire, they rummage through the raft's equipment pack and find a flashlight, which they use to signal the vessel. One of the vessel's pilots, wearing night vision goggles, spots the flashlight shining in the distance, while the rescue swimmers being hoisted back to the chopper. At 0208 on the 1st of January 2020, the Coast Guard rescue helicopter locates the 2 crew members aboard the second life raft. Again, the rescue swimmer is lowered to the life raft and assists both crew members while they're hoisted up to the helicopter. Once on board, the 2 survivors tell the pilots that they didn't see any other crew members escape the vessel before it sank. Now, low on fuel, the rescue helicopter sets a course for its base station at Kodiak. The C-130 stays on the scene to continue the marine information broadcast. The MH-60 Jayhawk reports the survivors' coordinates to the Coast Guard Command Center via the C-130. The Coast Guard generates a search pattern and passes the coordinates to the next helicopter. But the location information that gets relayed is incorrect. While en route to Kodiak, the pilot shuts off the auxiliary power unit to conserve fuel, which shuts down the heating. The survivors and crew have to wait out the flight in a freezing compartment. At 0324, the second MH-60 takes off from Air Station Kodiak to continue the search for any additional survivors. At 0340, 6 hours after the Mayday call, the first MH-60 carrying the 2 survivors lands at Air Station Kodiak, where Dean and John are transferred to a waiting ambulance and taken to the local hospital to be treated for hypothermia. At 0534, the second helicopter arrives on scene and follows the search pattern created from the incorrect coordinates. The coordinates relayed are 7.8 miles north of the Mayday transmission's location. At 0640, the helicopter leaves the scene and returns to base. Only then does the Search and Rescue Command realize the error. All succeeding searches are given the correct and updated search area based on the coordinates from the Mayday call and the updated coordinates of the life raft. On the 1st of January, Coast Guard MH-60 helicopters continue to search the area. The first C-130 aircraft is relieved by another C-130 from Anchorage. The Coast Guard cutter Mellon arrives on scene from Dutch Harbour at 16:15 to assist in the search efforts. But before sunset at 17:01, Mellon's captain withdraws from the search because of the solid ice accumulated on the deck during the voyage. At 18:08, 20 hours after receiving the Mayday call and after 16 hours of searching for any survivors, the Coast Guard suspend the search and rescue operations. The 2 survivors were admitted to Providence Kodiak Island Medical Center and were treated for hypothermia and exposure before being released the same day. The captain and remaining 4 crew members were not rescued. The Coast Guard used 3 MH-60 helicopters, 2 C-130 aeroplanes, and a cutter to search 1,400 square miles of ocean near Sutwick Island. Scandies Rose's owners hired a marine salver and a hydrographic survey company to find and document the wreck. On the 9th of February 2020, the motor vessel Endurance, owned and operated by Paradigm Marine, departed Kodiak Harbour. The Endurance used position data provided by the Alaska Maritime Prevention and Response Network, the Coast Guard, and Scandies Rose's owners to narrow a search area. On the morning of the 10th of February, Endurance arrived at the last known position of Scandies Rose and found a diesel fuel sheen stretching over a quarter of a mile on the surface of the water. Using sonar, they located Scandies Rose in about 49 meters of water, about 335 meters from the Mayday position, lying on its starboard side in an east-west direction with the bow pointing east. Off the starboard side was a debris field about 29 meters by 13 meters over the seafloor. Fishing buoys attached to the vessel floated upward to almost 12 meters below the waterline. On the 11th and 13th of February, they conducted ROV video surveys, working around the winter weather and tidal conditions. The ROV documented the wreck of Scandies Rose and the debris field. They located an empty EPIRB bracket on the port rail aft of the bridge door. Several of the vessel's external doors appear to have been damaged by the impact with the seafloor. Footage of the vessel's bottom port side and stern showed the hull intact. Survey reports indicated that 2 orange survival suits appearing to contain the remains of individuals were seen on the bridge but weren't recovered. No additional survival suits were seen. On the 13th of February, after the final ROV dive, Endurance returned to Kodiak in deteriorating weather. Scandies Rose was never recovered, but years later some of the buoys washed ashore and were returned to Captain Cobham's family.